With Invincible Season 3 now fully wrapped up, I wanted to take some time to reflect on the season as a whole and give you my thoughts on it all. Now, my experience watching this season was far different than my experience watching the first two, because I read the entire comic storyline in the lead up to Season 3, so I had a fairly decent idea of what was going to happen throughout this latest season, but I want to still approach my analysis of Season 3 solely looking at what was put on screen, and not how it compares to the comics or what is coming in the future. And in general, the central thematic conflict in Season 3 is Mark's feelings towards killing others and the lives he's unable to save. Season 2 saw Mark start to lean on his strong moral code to separate himself from his father. Though he still has love for his dad on a certain level, he vehemently opposes Omni-Man's actions at the end of Season 1, and wanted to make it clear to everyone on Earth that he is not his dad. And not killing others was the separation that Mark made in his head between himself and Nolan. Omni-Man clearly saw little importance in preserving human lives, while Mark puts the utmost importance on saving them. But as we know, the end of Season 2 saw Mark lose control and kill Angstrom Levy, or at least he thought he did. And this is something that weighs on him throughout Season 3. He hates that he broke his self-imposed rule in that moment. But the beautiful thing about Season 3 is that it places Mark in even more positions where taking a life is the only answer. We saw it in his interaction with the Immortal from the future, the alternate universe Invincibles, and of course Conquest. These were all situations where not killing someone was going to result in the death of many, many other people, so the morally correct decision was to kill them. And this season did a really great job of slowly bringing Mark to this understanding, ultimately culminating with the violent clash with Conquest, where we saw exactly why this mental development was necessary for Mark. If he did not fight Conquest with the intent to kill, he would have had no chance to win, even with the help of others. And understanding that he can't save everyone is a very important lesson to learn. And at the end of the day, I think telling an emotionally engaging and thematically interesting story has been a strength of every season of Invincible thus far, but it is especially prevalent for Season 3. Now, I made an entire video analyzing the Mark and Cecil ideological clash that took place in episode 2. Please give that video a watch if you haven't yet. But I think Oliver as a character is used incredibly well as a vehicle to make Mark understand Cecil's stance a bit. In seeing Oliver kill the Mauler twins, I think Mark got a glance of what would happen if he stopped holding back. Obviously, Mark is much stronger than Oliver, so if he wanted to, he could also one-tap the Maulers pretty easily. And despite Oliver being extremely young, he makes some decent arguments, because the Maulers will never cause harm again now. But more importantly, Mark seeing Oliver kill others so easily allows him to see what Cecil is afraid of. If Mark were to snap for whatever reason one day, he could become his dad and wreak havoc on the planet. And I think that's why he takes such great offense to Oliver's actions here. It's not just because he values human life, it's also because it shows him what he could become, and he hates the thought of becoming anything close to resembling his father. Yet, in order to defeat a foe on the level of Conquest, he has no choice but to fight like his dad would. And while he was unable to do that during his fight against the Viltrumites in Season 2 on the Thraxans' home world, he is willing to by the end of Season 3 due to his character development, in which Oliver did play a large role. Now, I also made a video titled "Stop Complaining About Invincible Losing Fights" prior to the release of Season 3, and while I do stand on my thematic arguments regarding why Mark losing fights is purposeful and makes sense, I do have to admit that the power scaling started to annoy me in this season, especially after showing us a training montage of Mark getting 138% stronger. Doc Seismic should in no way, shape, or form be messing with him. The fact that he just knocks Mark out is ridiculous. And with the dragon fight, I get it, you can't actually kill the dragon, you have to take out Liu. Fair enough, but I feel like that fight should have just been Mark throwing the dragon around and beating it senseless, as he then slowly grew more and more frustrated with the fact that it heals from everything he does to it. The fact that he was about to die from that fight does not sit right with me and felt contrived as hell in all honesty. However, the season did pick up after what was a bit of a lull because Powerplex is such an awesome character. The opening scene of episode 6 really reminded me of the opening of Batman vs. Superman, where we got to see Bruce's perspective of the destruction in Metropolis that Superman was causing, and seeing that Mark tried to save Jessica and Gretchen made everything all the more tragic and heartbreaking. I completely understand why Scott is feeling and eventually becomes fueled by trauma, rage, and grief towards Mark. But sadly, he's taking out his anger on the wrong Viltrumite, as Nolan was to blame. And this misplaced anger and Powerplex labeling Mark as a murderer helps further Mark's character progression, because I think it forces him to understand the gravity of his actions further. While not killing a villain might be what's best for his conscience, what if he spares their life only for them to do worse and kill others later down the line? Do all the lives that his father saved counterbalance all the lives he took? While Mark certainly doesn't have all or perhaps even any of the answers to these questions at this point, I love that Powerplex forces him to further question everything he believes in. I'm actually going to make an entire separate video analyzing the psychology of Powerplex as a character, so be on the lookout for that soon. Given that I read the entire comic run of Invincible prior to the release of Season 3, I was pretty sure that the Invincible War and Conquest fight would both be happening within this season, and these two episodes, along with Powerplex to a lesser degree, were really what I was most excited for, and all the Rex and Ray moments hit so hard for me in the lead up to this episode because I knew Rex's ultimate fate. They really did a great job of making Rex go from one of the more annoying characters in the show to one of its funniest and most likable characters. And his death was honestly way sadder here than it was in the comics for me. In general, I thought episode 7 was a good adaptation of the Invincible War. It's a rather short arc in the comics, so I was fine with it only being one episode. And again, it forced Mark to ponder all the lives he could have saved if he just killed Angstrom Levy at the end of season 2. And while yes, I wish the animation was a bit better, like my boy Tech Jacket should have had far more detail on his suit, there were a few moments where the animators locked in this episode, chiefly the close-up shots of all the evil Invincible variants as they looked at all the destruction they caused. Being able to see the reflection of the burning cities in their eyes was just such a glorious detail. And it did make me wish we could have seen this type of animation more frequently throughout the season. I mean, come on Amazon, this show is awesome and people love it. Give this show more than 10 animators, please.
Stand ready for my arrival, worm.
And now we've got to the part that you've all likely been waiting for, my thoughts on Conquest. And I mean, this episode was pretty fucking awesome. It definitely in a lot of ways felt like a throwback to the Omni-Man vs. Invincible fight, and I just love how sick and sadistic Conquest is. It was once said in the comics that he fights as if he's a spectator to his own battles, as he's just simply trying to enjoy every moment of his clashes. And I think that is an extremely accurate description of Conquest in this episode. Now really the only thing I've seen people complaining about with Conquest is his voice, and I'll be honest, I understand the complaints a little bit. I don't think Jeffrey Dean Morgan was the perfect choice. I think maybe a deeper, more booming voice would have suited the character better, maybe like a Josh Brolin or a Ron Perlman. But honestly, after I got past the shock value of hearing Negan voicing Conquest, I actually kinda digged it. And I think he did a great job capturing the sadistic nature of this villain really well. I don't really believe in perfection, but I do think this was pretty close to a perfect episode, and the animators absolutely locked in for like the entire fight. And our boy Mark finally won a fight. Granted, it was a near-death win and he needed some outside help, but this is the strongest foe he's fought and he came out on top. And I also love the dark arc we're setting up for him for season 4. We're now going to get a Mark who fights to kill moving forward, and I for one am very excited to watch this Mark in action. To touch on the Mark and Eve romance, since I haven't mentioned it at all yet, in general I thought they did a decent job with their romance storyline, though it does feel a little rushed early on. As Mark noted himself, dropping I love yous in episode 4 did feel a little too soon for all that, which on one hand I kind of understand. They were always the endgame couple, so it feels somewhat natural, and they did always have a thing for one another, but by the same token I think they could have taken a little more time with it. I would have had Mark confess his feelings at the end of season season 2 and then had them start dating off screen during the time between season 2 and 3. So we could have just started this season with them as an established couple who then hit a roadblock in episode 1 because Mark lets the whole future Eve thing slip. I think restructuring their relationship in that way would have made things feel like they developed a little bit more naturally. This wasn't like a massive knock on the season as a whole, just a small issue that I would have scripted slightly differently. But to be fair, by the time we got to episode 8 and Eve's near-death experience, I did buy that Mark truly loved her. Overall, I'd give season 3 of Invincible a solid 8.5 out of 10. I think with better animation and slight restructures to some of the fight sequences and narrative arcs, we could have had something truly special and maybe even a 10 out of 10. But as is, I think it is still a really enjoyable and highly entertaining season. And again, my biggest concern going in was how well they would adapt the Invincible War and Conquest fight. And in my assessment, they did an admirable job with both. Well, if you made it this far, please let me know what you thought of Season 3, and how would you rank it against the other seasons thus far. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please feel free to drop a like or subscribe for more Screen Stories content. I've made a few Invincible themed videos now, so a playlist with all of them will be linked in the description. Until next time, peace.